Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president. I'm back here in Virginia from my long road trip from Conyers, Georgia, and I'm heading on home, but I wanted to share with you one-third commentary on my trip to Georgia, and specifically with respect to the presidential debate. I've already done two commentaries, one on Social Security and one on immigration, but I wanted to do another one on the issue of health care. But I want to preface this commentary by telling you that, in my long life as a libertarian, I have come up with real heroes that have inspired me. Many of these are dead. I'm sure y'all are the same way. People like Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek and Leonard Reed, Frederick Bastiat. I mean, there's people that just have served as real inspirations for me for liberty and libertarianism. But I also have real life heroes, people that are alive today. And I want you to know that on Saturday at the Georgia Libertarian Party convention, I acquired a new hero that, I can't tell you how stunned I was by this person. His act of heroism and courage it absolutely blew me away. And I realized that I have just acquired a new real-life libertarian hero that serves as an inspiration for me, because what he did was so impressive and so amazing and so astounding that this guy is now a real-life hero for me. And I will tell you who he is, but let me set the framework for what happened here to enable me to reach this conclusion. I'm sure many of you have heard of the extreme right-wing senator named Joe McCarthy. McCarthy was a U.S. senator from Wisconsin, extreme right-winger, who was one of the leaders of the so-called anti-communist crusade. Now, this was at the height of the Cold War. This was when, the big Red Scare, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA were telling Americans that the communists were coming, the Russians were coming. It was all designed to justify the existence and the ever-growing budgets of the military-industrial complex. It was really a big racket, but it was a vicious racket. They were going after people and just destroying careers that had any association with the Communist Party. And there was nothing illegal about being a member of the Communist Party. That's part of living in a free society. You want to be a communist, you have a right to be a communist. But they were going after people with the intent of destroying them, trying to get them fired from their jobs, and make sure that they couldn't make any money for their families, essentially trying to kill them through starvation by depriving them of revenue. There's Hollywood producers and directors that were blacklisted because of the pressure that was put on them by McCarthy and others to fire anybody that was suspected of having communist leanings. So McCarthy had what are called the infamous McCarthy hearings in the U.S. Senate, where he was subpoenaing people with the idea of shaming them and exposing them as having some connection to the Communist Party or the Communist movement. And the famous statement that he would make is, "Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?" And people were terrified. If you said yes, then they would pressure your employer to fire you. And people were scared to death of losing their jobs. Some of these people were, paycheck to paycheck. And so a lot of them took the Fifth Amendment, which immediately branded them anyway, because people concluded, they must be guilty. Why else would they be taking the Fifth Amendment? But if anybody got exposed with any connection, McCarthy would go after them with a vengeance, exposing them and shaming them and ridiculing them. And it was a real horror story. Well, one day he's bludgeoning a lawyer that's representing the army, because McCarthy was claiming that the army was hiring communists, and to serve in the army. And so the army gets this guy named Joe Welch to represent them, a lawyer. So Welch starts accusing I think it was a young lawyer who was his assistant, at least another lawyer in his firm, Welch's firm, of being a communist. And Welch was indignant, angry and indignant, and he just lashes back at Joe McCarthy. And I don't know his exact words, but it was like, haven't you done enough damage, McCarthy? You're going to assassinate, another person here, his integrity, and then his famous line, his concluding line is, "Have you no decency, sir?" And that standing up to this inquisitor right-wing bully, what ended Joe McCarthy's career. I mean, that one little sentence, "Have you no decency, sir?" Now, why do I bring this up? Because that's exactly what took place on Saturday night in the course of the debate. It was one of the most incredible things I have ever seen. There was a Joe McCarthy proceeding taking place during that debate. And guess who was directing it? The right-wing moderator, Clint Russell. Now, you've heard me mention Clint Russell. If you've watched my previous debate commentaries, the one on Social Security, the one on immigration, so you know that what I'm referring to when I talk about this guy. He's one of these extreme right-wing people that have come into our party, and I have no doubts that this guy idolizes Joe McCarthy, none whatsoever, because I've never met an extreme right-winger that doesn't think that McCarthy was fantastic and that what he did in the McCarthy hearings was fantastic. Okay. This is what happened Saturday night. I was flabbergasted, absolutely flabbergasted. What this guy did, Clint Russell, extreme right-winger in the Libertarian Party, is he conducted this inquisition of the presidential candidates, a la Joe McCarthy. I mean, I really felt like I was in this dark ambiance of the McCarthy hearings, and not on whether somebody was a communist, but whether somebody had taken the COVID vaccine, and there was this inquisitorial tone of this Joe McCarthy guy, the Clint Russell, saying, "Have you ever taken the COVID vaccine?" And it was all designed to shame each presidential candidate who had taken the COVID vaccine. The same thing that Joe McCarthy was doing with, "Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?" And it was absolutely a fascinating phenomenon to watch, because you had this inquisitorial tone, and it was reinforced by this clown guy on the panel that for some reason they led into the debate. He was putting on a clown act. He calls himself the Toad, but he was working in tandem with Russell, and it was just an amazing performance. So Russell is conducting this inquisition. I mean, that's the best term for it. A Joe McCarthy, Red Scare inquisition, but dealing with the COVID vaccine. And so what he was doing was he was getting each presidential candidate to acknowledge whether he had taken this COVID vaccine, so that he could shame him and suggest that he didn't belong in the presidential race. Why? Because he had put his faith in government officials, which in Russell's mind obviously meant that meant you were disqualified to be a candidate unless you expressed remorse. And a lot of these people in the Joe McCarthy hearings would express remorse for what they'd done. They felt guilty. They were made to feel guilty and shameful. And this is what was going on Saturday night. That this guy Russell was making each presidential candidate who had taken the vaccine feel like a confession. It was like a show trial in the Soviet Union, where the defendant is expected to get up and express remorse for what he had done and seek forgiveness and then promise not to do it again. And I watched one of the candidates. You can watch the debate, but I felt so bad for him. He was there justifying what he had done, as if he were on trial. And he says, "Yeah, I took the vaccine, but the reason I did it," he starts justifying himself. "The reason I did it was my wife is compromised with her condition, and my mother is compromised with her condition, but that was why I did it." And he was like explaining himself like he was on trial. And another one says, "Well, yeah, I took it because I took the advice of my doctor, but I didn't take the booster shot." And like he's trying to justify his existence. or what his decision or what he had done. And the right winger, the extreme right winger, Clint Russell, had his extreme right wing ilk in the audience. There was 3 or 4 people that were reinforcing this, like with jeers, when somebody would make their confession that they had done this thing. Like I say, it was a phenomenal experience. You had this darkness of an Inquisition. Okay, that brings me to my hero. Mike Termott, I want you to know that you are one of my real life heroes from this day forward. Your act of heroism and courage absolutely astounded me. Sir, I tip my hat to you. Mike, you and I have had a lot of conversations and a lot of back and forth, and we get along and all, but Mike Termott, you are one of my heroes. I got to tell you, I'm blown away by what you did. Because when this inquisitor, this extreme right winger, Joe McCarthy inquisitor, Clint Russell, gets to Mike Termott, Mike Termott stares him in the face, and the inquisitor says, "Did you take the vaccine?" Mike Termott stares him in the face and says, "None of your business." Oh, it was this moment of beauty. It was just, I can't tell you. I mean, you'll be able to watch the debate. None of your business. Now, he didn't say what Joe Welch said to Joe McCarthy, "Have you no decency, sir?" But that was the message that came through. Have you no decency? Kurt Joe McCarthy Russell, or Clint Joe McCarthy Russell. Have you no decency? None of your business. It was a moment of beauty and heroism and courage that shut this guy down, because he still had to get to me. He had still not done his little Inquisition act on me. I was the last guy left, but he never got to me. And I don't know why, okay? He never put his little Inquisition on me. There's 2 possible reasons. Either because Mike Termott's act of courage and heroism shut this guy up, or he felt he didn't want to tangle with me on this issue. But my hunch is that it was Mike's act of courage and terrorism that shut this guy down, and then prevented him psychologically and emotionally from being shut down by none of your business, and which meant that he didn't want to come and grapple with me. Now, let me tell you something about these extreme right wingers. For one thing, they do horrific damage to our party. I mean, you look at this, at what the mainstream press says about the Libertarian Party. Have you noticed that they describe the Libertarian Party as right-wing? It's a right-wing political party. That's because of these extreme right-wingers that have come into the party with this kind of mindset, okay? This inquisitorial mindset that, by golly, if you took the vaccine, you don't belong in this party. You're not a true libertarian. Now, let me tell you something about these extreme right-wingers. They are always, without exception, infected by the illness of hypocrisy. Never, without a doubt, without exception, they are always infected by a severe case of hypocrisy. And in this case, with this guy, Clint Russell, it's double. Because if you've seen my video commentary on Social Security, okay, now notice what this guy's doing with his Inquisition. Did you take the vaccine? And what he's suggesting is, you put your faith in the government. You're a bad libertarian. You don't belong to be running in this presidential race. You don't belong in this party because you put your faith in the government. That's his message, okay? Now, go watch my commentary on Social Security, and you'll see that this guy puts his faith in the coercive apparatus of the Social Security Administration. Isn't that amazing? And in the Internal Revenue Service, because he takes me to task for wanting to get rid of this socialist program. He says people will die in the streets. And so here's the guy that's over there blasting, lambasting these presidential candidates for having taken the vaccine, saying they're not genuine libertarians, for putting their faith in Fauci or their doctor or whatever. And he's over there putting his faith in the coercive apparatus of the Social Security Administration and the Internal Revenue Service. How's that for a sheer case of hypocrisy? Right-wing, extreme right-wing hypocrisy. That's not all. If you go watch my video commentary on the immigration issue, you'll see, this is a guy, an extreme right-winger, that puts his faith in the tremendous apparatus of the Immigration Service and the Border Patrol, the whole police state along the border, including what Governor Abbott's doing, okay? This is the guy that's saying you're not a real libertarian if you're putting your faith in the government or in your doctor on the vaccine, is putting his faith in the gigantic immigration control apparatus, which is a socialist apparatus, as I explained in my commentary. How's that for a sheer case of hypocrisy? I mean, you know, there's that old biblical saying, you know, about picking the speck out of somebody else's eye when you got a beam in your own. This guy can't see the beam in his own eye. I mean, this is the trouble with extreme right-wingers. They don't even realize they got a beam in their eye. Now, let me explain something else. These extreme right-wingers come into our party with a totally warped interpretation of what libertarianism is. You see, in this Inquisition, he put this Joe McCarthy type Inquisition that he subjected the presidential candidates to. He's trying to convey that libertarianism is anti-vaccine. That you're not a genuine libertarian if you take the vaccine. That's what he's trying to convey. And anybody that watches this video from outside the Libertarian Party, or if he's nominated the vice presidential candidate of this party, which, you know, he's hoping to do, he's going to be communicating to the American people that libertarianism is anti-vaccine and anti-masks, which is absolutely a false, extreme right-wing interpretation of libertarianism. Libertarianism is no more anti-vaccine and anti-mask than it is pro-vaccine and pro-mask. Libertarianism is a philosophy of choice, where people should be free to make their own choices. Okay, it's not a philosophy that says you need to take the vaccine or that you should not take the vaccine. It's a pro-choice philosophy, and it's not a philosophy that engages in berating people, humiliating people, abusing people, shaming people for making the choice that some libertarians don't approve of. Okay, so this guy, Clint Russell, doesn't believe in the COVID vaccine. He thinks that that's libertarian. And so that's why he engages in this inquisition and also suggests that people are not qualified to run for president because they put their faith in their doctor's opinion or the Fauci's opinion or whatever. You know, who died and made him king as to what makes a person qualified or disqualified to run for president? I don't see anything in the bylaws of this party, never see anything in bylaws of this party, that whether you take a vaccine or not determines whether you can run for president or not. Who is he to decide what is qualified and disqualified to run for president? All right. Now, so he's got a totally warped version of what of libertarianism is that he is communicating to the American people. And anybody that watches this video might very well get that interpretation. Non-libertarians, you could forgive them for coming up with this interpretation, because here's the debate moderator, which is really bizarre. Putting an extreme right-wing person that is there advancing his agenda in tandem with this clown guy that's on the panel is really weird. It's really bizarre. I mean, you know, debate moderators are supposed to be neutral. I mean, they may be, you know, tough and ask difficult questions, but they don't have an agenda up there. This guy's got an extreme right-wing agenda as a debate moderator. It's absolutely a fascinating deal. And warped. It was a warped decision. I mean, he had no business being a debate moderator there. So there he is with this warped vision. Now let's look at the political consequences of this. I mean, this is just dumb politically. That here you've got this guy that's moderating this presidential debate that is communicating to people that we libertarians, you know, condemn and shame and insult people who took the vaccine, people who use masks. Let me ask you a question. What are the chances that those people are ever going to vote for libertarian if they are convinced that this is what libertarianism is all about? I mean, this guy has already cost us all these votes. And if he's nominated as the vice presidential candidate, heaven forbid, horrors, that's what he's going to be doing. He's going to be shaming every American. I mean, I've talked about the 1% vote that we're going to get in November if we run this same kind of candidacy. You're looking at a 0.01% because people are not going to put up with that. I guarantee you they're not going to put up with that. They make their own conscientious decision. Like this presidential candidate made the decision because his wife was compromised, his mother was compromised. They're not going to put up with this libertarian guy, this extreme right-wing libertarian guy that's going to be shaming them and insulting them, telling them that they're not real true blue Americans if they take the COVID vaccine. And so you're not going to get one vote from any. That's a lot of people that took this vaccine. And when you sit there and you insult them and you condemn them and you tell them that they're not real Americans for doing this, you can kiss their vote goodbye. It's a dumb political decision. And to make this guy debate moderator, where there's this imprimatur of legitimacy, is a horribly bad decision because it makes it look like this is what the Libertarian Party stands for. It's this warped right-wing interpretation that is really a warped interpretation of libertarianism. And it's damaging to the party and it's damaging to the candidates. That's not all. He attacks me, okay? Now, this guy has clearly steeped himself for the last 4 or 5 years in every single website on where the COVID virus originated. I mean, I think this guy, I would say it borders on an obsession, okay? He has clearly spent most of his life, and that's the interpretation I got, studying all these websites about where did COVID originate, Wuhan or the CIA headquarters at Langley or maybe the CIA outpost in Wuhan or whatever. But this guy is clear. Now, I never really grasped what his conclusion was as to where the virus originated. But because I haven't steeped my life trying to figure this out, he says I'm disqualified to run for president. I mean, here again, the king, the right-wing, arrogant king decides what qualifies and disqualifies a libertarian presidential candidate. Okay, then he takes me to task because he wants to put everybody in jail who he says caused death or lockdowns from the COVID vaccine or issued the lockdowns. And so he asked me, do you want to put all these people in jail? And I said, well, you know, if they've committed a crime, I think they should be punished. If they've committed a murder, yeah. But we have to determine whether there's a murder here, a criminal offense. Well, then the clown pipes in, and the clown says, send them all to Guantanamo. And this is incredible, because now here's, 2 of them are saying, castigate these guys for putting their faith in government with the COVID vaccine. Now the clown is saying, put your faith in the Pentagon and the CIA and their torture and prison center there at Guantanamo. I mean, it was incredible. And so when I turned to Russell doesn't denounce that at all. I mean, he doesn't take the guy to task at all. And I'm sitting there saying, oh my gosh, is this really what Russell is advocating as an extreme right-wing guy? Because remember, the extreme right-wingers love the military. They love the CIA and so forth. So I'm thinking, is this guy? So I challenged this guy and I said, look, if you have evidence that people have committed a murder, why don't you take your evidence to a grand jury, federal grand jury, state grand jury? Because he's convinced that these people have murdered people by advising people to take the COVID vaccine. He was dumbfounded, just stunned. He clearly had never thought about this, because I got the distinct impression that he just wants to take everybody who advised people to take the COVID vaccine and just send them to jail. We don't need no stinking trials. We don't need no due process of law. I mean, that's the distinct impression I could. And then, the clown up there was saying, well, just send them to Guantanamo, where there are no trials. There is no due process. And I'm sitting there saying, oh my gosh, this is like North Korea. I mean, North Korea, they just round people up and send them to jail. There's no legitimate trials. There's no trial by jury. And these right-wingers, they always say they support the Constitution, except when it comes to, like, the Bill of Rights, trial by jury, due process of law. And so But here's another interesting feature of criminal jurisprudence. Criminal jurisprudence 101 is that you cannot convict somebody of doing something wrong unless there's a law that criminalizes that wrong. In other words, you can't prosecute somebody for doing something horrific unless it's stated in the law that this is a criminal offense. Otherwise, you end up with a North Korean type system where the dictator can say, I didn't like what you did there, and I'm just going to declare it a criminal offense. You're sent to jail. Okay. So, is there a criminal offense, a criminal law in the books, either in the federal jurisdiction or the state jurisdiction, against federal officials that advise people to take vaccines? I've never heard of it. Okay, it may exist. I could be wrong. It could be there, but I've never heard of such a law. But this guy, Russell, says punish him anyway. Send him to jail. Because in his mind, they need to be punished. We don't need no stinking trials. We don't need no criminal statutes. We just round them up and send them on to the gulag. Okay. Now, here's another fact. Okay, you want another factor of sheer hypocrisy on these right-wingers, the extreme right-wingers? And there's a difference between a right-winger and extreme right-wingers. These are the extreme right-wingers in this party. Now, they are big 10th Amendment people, okay? The 10th Amendment, state sovereignty, nullification, and all this, okay? When most of the lockdowns were taking place at the state level, okay? There were some lockdowns at the federal level, but most of the lockdowns took place at the state level, okay? Under the traditional police powers of the states under the 10th Amendment. So here's this guy, Kurt Russell, decrying what these guys did with the lockdowns, but they were exercising powers that Clint Russell loves under the 10th Amendment. These are the traditional police powers of the states. That's what they're called, the police powers. And you can Google that. Just Google police powers. And the states have the authority that the federal government doesn't have. The federal government doesn't have police powers. They don't have inherent powers that are traditionally accorded to governments. Their powers are limited to the Constitution. The states are different. The states have what are called traditional police powers to regulate in the interest of health, safety, welfare, or security. Okay. Now notice the critical one is health. That these are the traditional powers of the states under the 10th Amendment. This is what this man supports, the extreme right-wingers. This is when they cite the 10th Amendment, the traditional police powers. So what he's saying is, I support the police powers, I'm a 10th Amendment person, but I want to send these government officials to jail for exercising the powers that I support under the 10th Amendment. That's what passes for libertarianism with these extreme right-wingers. Now, here's the clincher. And this is what threw this guy ballistic with respect to my part of this presentation and this debate. I turned to the audience and I said, look, if people have committed crimes, fine, prosecute them. But we've got to keep our eye on the ball. Our job in this party is to lead America to freedom. That's our job. And so what is freedom? And it's raising people's vision to a higher level of getting government entirely out of healthcare. In other words, removing the power through the Constitution that the state has for this police power with respect to health, and the federal government with respect to the Centers for Disease Control, the FDA, and so forth, Medicare, Medicaid. Get government entirely out of healthcare. And that's the vision that we need to take to the American people. Now we're talking about a genuinely free society. And so I proposed a constitutional amendment, which I've long advocated, that separates healthcare in the state. This model on the First Amendment, that neither the federal government nor the state governments shall provide healthcare or abridge the free exercise thereof. This guy went ballistic because it goes right over his head. See, he doesn't realize that they're removing the very power that he's complaining about, the power to shut people down. Because in his mind, the extreme right-wing mind, all they want is to get their people in public office. They don't want to shut down the government's powers to do this. They just want their people to run this apparatus. Okay, so they want like Bobby Kennedy Jr. to be the head of the Centers for Disease Control so that he can inflict a reign of terror against the big pharma and the pharmaceuticals and the doctors that prescribe this medicine, and big investigation and put them in jail whether there's a crime on the books or not, and we don't need no stinking trials or something. Round them up and send them out. And then at the state level, they want to put their people in charge of the state departments of health. A free market person, a libertarian person, an extreme right-wing conservative person. Instead of just removing the power of the state to regulate health, they're trying to get their people in office. That is not freedom. That whenever you vest government with these kind of powers, you have to assume that your worst enemy is going to exercise these powers. And this is what this guy doesn't understand. He thinks that all you got to do is just get the right people in public office. And what he also doesn't understand, let's assume that he gets his dream and he jails every single doctor and government official that prescribed or that advised the COVID vaccine, and every single person that did the lockdown, put them all in jail. He thinks that's a free society now. It's ludicrous that even if you do jail all those people, for one thing, you definitely don't have a free society if you don't have trial by jury and due process of law, and you're putting people into jail for offenses that are not criminal offenses on the books. I mean, that's your North Korean system. But you also don't have a free system because you still have government in charge of health care. This is what went right over his head. In order to achieve the genuinely free society, you've got to separate health care in the state. Finally, another bit of hypocrisy here. This guy, obviously, given his position on Social Security, his position on Medicare has got to be the exact same thing. That if you abolish Medicare immediately, which I favor, and all other socialist programs, people would be dying in the streets. Okay? So here he is putting his faith in the whole Medicare industry and presumably the Medicaid industry, not in freedom, while he's castigating and subjecting these presidential candidates to the Inquisition, to the Joe McCarthy Inquisition. So to wrap this up, Mike Termott, I tip my hat to you, sir. You are my newest modern day libertarian hero for telling this guy the way it is. None of your business, because it isn't any of his business what people's private choices are. Libertarianism is the right to choose. It's not what he says it is. That is, people agreeing with his choices. And if we're going to achieve a genuinely free society in this nation, we libertarians have to do that. And we're not going to do it with this extreme right-wing view. Okay, that's going to send us further down the morass of darkness. And what I'm talking about is due process of law, right to counsel, the things that the extreme right-wing calls technicalities in criminal cases. Trial by jury, they're not technicalities. Habeas corpus, these are essential features of a free society. In fact, habeas corpus has been called the linchpin of a free society. Due process of law goes all the way back to Magna Carta in 1215. And the idea of jurisprudence 101, that before you punish a person by jailing him or executing him, you have to prove in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt that he has violated a criminal law on the books. That we don't have, just roundups and sending people to jail for committing what people, some dictator considers is an offense that's not on the books. And finally, to achieve legitimately free society, we libertarians have to make the case for the separation of healthcare in the state, something that the extreme right wing ardently opposes. I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president. My campaign website is jacobforliberty.com.